hopefully trying to make peace.
Is that enough?
We'll see.
Yeah. Because
it's better than the alternative.
What's the alternative?
Hell.
Islam has now become part of, Western culture.
And we could go back and forth continually about whose historical atrocities were worse.
Yes.
And that's a rough contest because, the devil is definitely in the details there. And then it also brings up the other problem, which is, well, when the Spaniards went to Central America, a lot of the bloodshed they produced, or the death they produced, was actually a consequence of the introduction of disease. Because that took out about 95% of the native population in the Western Hemisphere.
World War I and World War II were nationalistic conquests. They were not religiously inspired. I mean, you can argue to what extent were World War I and World War II religiously inspired, but certainly Islam was not a main feature of the 30 million people that died in World War I or however many people died in World War II. So the point is that we're saying is that, and obviously you've got concepts in the West like manifest destiny.
For example, in ancient Egyptian cosmology, there were four deities, four central deities, although a host of associated deities, and one of them was Osiris, who was the deity of the state.
If you say Muhammad Hijab, you are a hypocrite, you are a bad guy, you are violent. So you know what, that's something I have to look into.
In an unprecedented dialogue, two monumental thinkers, Dr. Jordan Peterson and Muhammad Hijab, delve deep into the intricate tapestry of the Christian and Islamic faith. Their perspectives are rich, thought-provoking, and sometimes polarizing. But that's not all. I'll be jumping in and out of this gripping conversation to offer a unique perspective, the mind of God, inviting you to explore the spiritual and intellectual intersections that unite and divide us all. So join us for an enlightening experience where theology meets reason, and let's navigate through the profound questions that shape our beliefs. And remember, we all have a mind, but there's no better mind than the mind of God.
So because I'm 100% disagreeable and and not polite at all, I want to get the elephant out of the room. I do like to do that. And there's been a recent video that you put up, a message to the Muslims. And before I say this, I do want to speak about the important topics, the theological topics, and all these kind of postmodernism. That will come. But I just wanted to mention this first, because for me, it's just get the elephant out of the room and then we can move on.
Sometimes it's just replaced by a slightly smaller elephant.
Well, a smaller elephant is better than nothing.
Yeah.
What I was going to say is that, it didn't land well with a lot of the Muslim community.
Yeah.
And I think the reason why is that it was seen as condescending, it was seen as kind of patronizing. What was your intention with this video exactly?
To start a dialogue stupidly and badly. Because that's how you have to start them. We talked already about the idea of tolerance. And I'm actually not here to be tolerant. Because tolerance sort of presumes that I know what I'm doing and you guys don't, but I'll put up with you anyways. And see, I don't actually think I know what I'm doing exactly. And so I think, well, you might have something to teach me. And so it's not so much tolerance as, I would say, hopefully something approximating an expression of reasonable humility, which is, well, first of all, we occupy the same space, and as far as I'm concerned, it'd be better if we got along, and we've all had our own revelations, personally and let's say socially, and we don't know how to integrate those revelations, and that's rough, that's hard. And so I'm here to listen, and the message was preposterous in some sense, although not much more so than the message I made to Christians, which I wouldn't say was exactly flattering. And, I thought it would probably ruffle some feathers, but I thought it might also initiate a dialogue, or at least further it, and that has happened, I mean, certainly there were many people who were irritated at me and thought that I was being condescending, and I wasn't trying to be, because I do have a lot of people who are paying attention to my lectures around the world on the Islamic side, which is quite surprising to me, especially with regard to the attention that's been given to the biblical lectures. And I don't take any of that for granted. And I wasn't trying to either capitalize on it or interfere with it. I was trying to do the next stupid thing that might move things forward a bit. And it's actually worked, I would say. Well, first of all, I am here, and I know that's not a direct consequence of that message, but at least it didn't break it. And there have been many other Muslim groups who've reached out to me in a serious way, at least in part because of that. And so I think we have to understand that we're going to stumble into each other a fair bit if we actually try to talk, because of all the elephants and the snakes that are lurking under the carpet. And I think it's a very good thing to get them out in the open. I'm a very agreeable person, as it turns out. Yes, I know it's to my detriment, but
I wouldn't have guessed, to be honest, that you're very agreeable.
Yes, it's one of my major character flaws, but I don't like conflict at all. But the reason I would say I'm prone to engage in it is because sometimes what's under the carpet needs to be revealed, because it's going to cause a lot of trouble if it just sits there and brews or broods and multiplies. And so it is one of the advantages of disagreeable people, having them around, because they will haul things up for inspection that everyone else might be loath to confront. You know, the downside is, well, you might do that too often, you know, and that's a hard thing to get right. So I'm not here in a spirit of tolerance. I'm here in a spirit of ignorance. And I'm hoping, see, the other thing I've been thinking through, and you guys can tell me what you think about this, is it seems that in the situation we're in now, sort of globally speaking, that it would be useful for people of religious faith to note that there are other people of religious faith with whom they have much in common, one of them being religious faith, and that they are also confronting, as people of religious faith, a world that is attempting to, let's say, shake itself free of that. And so it isn't exactly obvious to me that it's a great time for people of religious faith to concentrate on their differences, given that there are perhaps more important elephants to address, let's say, or fish to fry. And so I've been I'm very ignorant about the Islamic tradition. And I'm trying to rectify that. It's very difficult to step outside your own culture and to really understand someone else's. And I'm under no illusions, I hope, about the degree of understanding that I've managed, but I have tried to understand what we might share in common. And that's crucial. And so certainly one of the ideas that we all share in common on the religious front, let's say, is that there is an ultimate unity that should be placed above all else. And so that's part of the great monotheistic tradition. And I'm going to speak mostly as a psychologist rather than as, say, an advocate of the Christian tradition, because it isn't obvious to me that
Let me kind of push back a little bit on that point, because you're an individual, like, obviously in your newest book, you're talking very categorically about precision. And I would say you're an individual that is very precise. You're categorized, like, if I was to say anything, I would say that you're an individual that's scrupulously meticulous in exactitude and, I don't know, meticulousness or whatever, So you speak and you think about what you're going to say before you say it. That's what you're known for. And in fact, if someone says something which is kind of off the mark a little bit, you pull them up for it, right? And
usually because I don't understand it then.
Yeah, no, for example, like the Kathy Newman interview, like, the assumptions and the questioning that she had when she was questioning herself, you pulled her up on it. And that's why it became so popular, the discussion was so popular. And you're a clinical psychologist. So what I was going to say is this, like, for example, if I were to make a video, right, I say this message to to white Canadians or something, and I said,
it's hard to talk to them.
And I say, look, sensitively, why don't you reach out to some Russians, or heaven forbid, reach out to Black Africans or First Nation people, whatever it may be. How do you think the community of white Canadians, let's say, for the sake of argument, will react to that kind of message?
Well, if it was you,
yeah.
Well, you're pretty disagreeable, so you'd probably get bit back a lot.
Yeah, but exactly.
I don't, it's hard to say until you do it, I mean, I have reached out to other communities, let's say. I did an interview with a friend of mine who's a Native American carver who lives on the West Coast. And, I'm not very happy with the narrative that's being promoted in Canada, which is that the European settlement of Canada is best viewed as genocidally colonial. And having said that, my friend, this Carver, was in a residential school in Canada, and the residential schools were put forward by the government in an attempt, and other institutions, in an attempt to separate the Indigenous children from their families and then socialize them rapidly according to European norms. And there was some positive motivation for that, and sometimes that helped and worked. But one of the things that did happen was that some schools were, let's say, invaded by people of a pronounced pedophilic and sadistic bent. And my friend ended up in one of those schools, and his life was so dreadful that you can't even hear about it without serious emotional damage. And so, I went forward with that discussion, and it was very contentious, but it went very well. And it told a story that was true and needed to be told. And so, you step into foreign territory at your peril, that's for sure. But, and it was relatively difficult for me to arrange for this to be a possibility.
Yeah, of course.
But my thought, again, because I'm trying to look for what we have to offer each other rather than what divides us, I thought it was worthwhile.
But let me push back again once again on this point. So, for example, it's not always what you say. Sometimes it can be what you don't say. So, for instance, I think you've become somewhat of an emblem of Western civilization, right? In terms of you're an intellectual.
Heaven help us.
No, but you have. And I also push back on the point that this is a foreign culture, because I think that Islam, and you've mentioned this in the lecture as well, that Islam has now become part of, Western culture.
Yeah, well, that's the open question. As we noted in the introductory remarks, it's like, is Islam part of the West? We're kind of having the same discussion about Russia in some real sense. And that's really going well at the moment.
Yeah, so there's that part. But what I would say is that, if there is a bloody history of Western colonialism, and that's almost undeniable. Like, for example, look at Algeria, for instance. Algeria, when it was annexed by France.
There's no dispute in that.
There's no dispute in what happened there. So the issue, I'm giving you one example of many. The Spanish colonialism of Latin America, for example. There are things that happened. And I'm not saying that's not things that happened on the Western front. There are things that happen on the Muslim front as well, of course.
This is true.
Yeah, no doubt about it, right? No, I'm not going to stand here and, defend the Muwahidun who came and were very intolerant to Jews and Christians and kicked them out of their homes and so on like that, who existed in Spain as well, in fact. So the point is, I feel like, I don't know, as a psychologist, I think my question would be to you, don't you think, is it of any benefit to be concessionary in this regard? Like, to start off a discussion by saying, like, we know that these are things that could cause resentment. Right?
Yes.
Because, like, for example, I know a lot of Algerian people, and this is very clear in their historical memory.
Yes.
And the accusation will be that the West have colonial amnesia here. They are not taking into account what they've done. I'll be honest with you.
Well, they don't even know how. Well, okay. So,
do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, look, here's how I would address that psychologically. In many of the mythological stories that I've read, there is the motif of the evil uncle. And so, for example, in the ancient Egyptian cosmology, there were four central deities, although a host of associated deities. And one of them was Osiris, who was the deity of the state. That might be a good way of thinking about it. And he had an evil brother, Seth, who was always conspiring in the background to overthrow the state and to establish his own rule, say, based on power. And the Egyptians, this is thousands of years ago, had figured out by that point, because their society was quite large, that there was something in the social structure itself that posed a threat to the structure, and that was the tendency for the structure and its leaders to become willfully blind, and for conspiratorial powers or patterns that would use resentment and the desire for power to overthrow that. And they thought of Osiris as willfully blind and Seth as an eternal danger, and that's true. But there's another element to the evil uncle too, which is that in some real sense, and it's a very difficult thing to sort through morally, all of us walk on blood-soaked ground, because human history is, in some regards, a nightmarish catastrophe. And some of that's just because life was so difficult, but it's also because people did unbelievably cruel and malicious and deceptive, committed unbelievably cruel and atrocious and deceptive acts. And so we're all stuck with this problem that here we are in relative peace and harmony so far, although we seem to be doing everything we can to try to disrupt that at the moment. And part of the price that's being paid for that is an endless litany of historical catastrophe. And then we all have to face up to, well, what does that mean for us in terms of our individual responsibility? And how do we construe ourselves and our society in light of that fact? And we could go back and forth continually about whose historical atrocities were worse.
Yes.
And that's a rough contest because, you know, the devil is definitely in the details there. And then it also brings up the other problem, which is, well, when the Spaniards went to Central America, a lot of the bloodshed they produced, or the death they produced, was actually a consequence of the introduction of disease, because that took out about 95% of the native population in the Western Hemisphere. And then the conquistadors were, well, maybe they weren't the finest representatives of the highest flowering of Western civilization. We don't know to what degree they were the sort of thugs that couldn't get along at home and went out adventuring. And even if I, say, attempted to take full responsibility for that, I'm not sure what it would mean, because I suspect I have a lot more in common with you people in the modern world than I do with Spanish conquistadors from 300 years ago. Now, I'm not saying I bear no responsibility for the bloodshed of the past, but I would say we all bear that responsibility, and that's something, I would say that's something like the conception of original sin.
Yeah, and that's the point of difference. To be honest, I would disagree with that point. Like, as a Muslim, there is a verse in the Quran that says, وَلَا تَزِرُ وَازِرَةٌ وِزْرَ أُخْرَى, that one soul should not bear the responsibility of someone else's actions.
Yeah, well, that's the other ethical complication. It's can you call me out in relationship to the atrocity of the past?
Of course not. No,
well, but it's complicated, right? Because at the same time you do say, and I don't mean you personally, but you know, we can say things like, well, the West is not bearing sufficient responsibility for its colonial past. And so at some level, that kind of devolves down to the individual.
Hijab takes a hypocritical stance in this opening. He tries to corner Dr. Jordan Peterson about Western colonialism, in essence, saying that because of the evils of America's past, our spiritual influence is nullified. And then Dr. Jordan Peterson, he has a wonderful response to how, if you want to look at it that way, we all are in the same boat, every single nation, because what nation or civilization hasn't been fighting for control and power since the beginning of time? Even in the Bible, God's very own people, the children of Israel, went to conquer a land that was given to them by who? By God, as a judgment, because God said he can no longer tolerate the sin of that land. And so I like how Jordan states that this is very similar to the original sin, that just like how Adam and Eve sinned, we have all sinned and we are all guilty through the inheritance of that sin. And the same way many nations in their history have evils, have sins that all the people of that nation has inherited. But when Dr. Peterson takes this angle, all of a sudden now hijab, he switches it up. He quotes a verse from the Quran saying that no, he doesn't believe everything that Dr. Peterson just said, because there is a verse in the Quran that actually states that every man is guilty for his own sins. So the opening that he takes in the first place was all pointless. And it seems like all he's doing is just trying to win a debate rather than speak truth.
So let me kind of rephrase it then. I think that's more of a left-wing criticism. It's like, there's reparations and affirmative action programs. I'm not advocating any of that, and nor do I even believe in any of that, to be honest with you.
Nor me.
Yeah, so what I was putting as an alternative to that is that there is this kind of, I would call this maybe a new Orientalist narrative, which states that Islam is incapable of X, Y, Z. Call it tolerance, call it whatever it is. and look at what's happened in Islamic history. You've got all of these deaths and you've got all of these kinds of things that are happening comparative to what we have in the West. And what we're saying is that let's look at what you have in the West, because liberalism was an ideology that was started in the 17th century. Really it was crystallized, with John Locke and all these kind of things then. And after liberalism was established, and in fact, the Constitution and the documents of the Founding Fathers and stuff like that were based on the liberal, secular principles. Even after that, you had Napoleonic Wars. Even after that, you had colonialism continue. You had slavery continue until 1867, whatever it was, the American Civil War ended. So what we're saying is that this picture of history, that, the West is best, basically, this idea, because our ideology can fix all problems, it's not reasonable when you look at the historical records. One scholar called Naveed Sheikh actually done a piece, it's called Body Count, and he was counting the amount of people that died in each civilization, and he put the Western civilization as the highest. And because you have things like World War I and World War II, and these things were, World War I and World War II were nationalistic conquests. They were not religiously inspired. You can argue to what extent were World War I and World War II religiously inspired, but certainly Islam was not a main feature of the 30 million people that died in World War I, or however many people died in World War II. So the point is that we're saying is that, and obviously you've got concepts in the West like manifest destiny, and which I think every single president of the United States of America believed in, westward expansion, these kind of things. The point is that the proposition that the ideology of the West can fix our problems, this is what we have an issue with, because what we're saying is that if we look at the historical record, there is no evidence of that. In fact, what it's shown us is that there's more bloodshed. Individualism has caused more death. With all due respect, I know that you do cherish individualism. I'm not saying everything is bad about it, but when you have a society deplete of a communitarian ethic, is bereft of a communitarian ethic, then you can have these issues. And so these are conversations, and I think you are moving towards a communitarianism. Your newest book, you were talking about institutions and these kind of things, and the respect for tradition and these kind of things. I'm not sure if I'm reading you correctly, but these are the kinds of conversations I think we need to have. But on that point, I think I don't want this to be interrogative. And I
just want to interject
please.
thing, because I think it's important. I think, Jordan, you're very kind, and I understand. I also watched The Message to Muslims, and I thought there were some problems with it, definitely.
Okay.
But when you said there's an elephant in the room that I want to address, my mind immediately went to videos I've seen of you with some of your friends in the street, and suggesting violence and suggesting aggressive actions against other communities, which in the West is something that, let's say, in Canada, people don't do that. And that even though there might be civil conflicts, we have a state, we have police, we have an apparatus, which is there to deal, which is not completely perfect, but which functions to install the rules. So when I see someone in the street surrounded by men wearing masks, who are talking about, if these other groups come out, they're going to see us and we're going to be there, and I'm looking for Jews, and we're talking about blood, and there's these very strange behaviors that I think that
when did I say we're looking for Jews? Do you remember that when I said that exact statement?
I just remember you talking to police about
Jewish people.
Yeah.
I'd like to get an exact quote. Okay, so I don't remember. I recall.
Well, the other one, the one that I definitely saw that you spoke for quite a while was relating to some issues with Hindu communities.
So what happened recently? I don't want to go.
Well, this is
I think the reason why it's important. The reason why it's important is that I'm a Christian, very much a Christian. I have many problems with modern Western culture. Right. But we are in the West.
Okay.
Right, and you are in the West.
Yeah, and I am a Westerner.
Right, and you live in the West, and so...
And I'm British.
Yes.
Just like you're Canadian.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
And so, to me, the elephant in the room is that's part of the elephant in the room. But there are many people who told Jordan not to come here because of those videos.
Okay, well, there's a lot of people that told me not to have this conversation with Jordan because of some of his videos. And that's why me and Jordan...
Lots of people don't want to have difficult conversations.
But what I'm saying with Jordan is that what makes him gallant and brave is that despite those voices that are the voices of disunity, because he's been cancelled more times than I have, despite the fact that he's been cancelled in Cambridge University or whatever, I don't care about all these institutions. With all due respect, I know this man is a person of influence. And in my estimation, I see him as one of the most, if not the most influential Western public voice. Right? So for that reason, I speak to him. And for that reason, I don't apologize to anyone for doing so. And I think in a way, he sees the same thing in me. Maybe not to the same level, but the fact that I'm half his age he knows what's going to come in 30 years' time. So he's playing the cards right. And I think at the end of the day, my voice, my emotions, what I'm saying in the streets of London or Leicester or whatever else is how a lot of Muslim people feel. But don't forget, yes, I'm disagreeable. And I'm not, my temperament is not the temperament of the average Muslim. So you've got to differentiate between me as an individual, me, Muhammad Hijab as an individual, and Islam. Do you see? If you say, Muhammad Hijab, you are a hypocrite, you are a bad guy, you are violent. So you know what? That's something I have to look into. Do you know what I mean? If that's your advice to me, that's something I have to look into.
Well, I would also say there's no moral advantage in being a pushover either.
Yes, I agree.
Right? And so these things are very hard to calibrate correctly.
Yeah.
And so, well, and if we come at this in a spirit of mutual ignorance and with some degree of, maybe this is where tolerance is more of an issue. Is, we're going to have to tolerate each other's rough edges and imperfections in order to talk, even if we think that there's something useful to be gleaned. And my sense is that, well, we're called upon to separate the wheat from the chaff, and that's not so much to damn the chaff as it is to gather the wheat. And it seems to me in the biblical stories, in the Old Testament, there's an immense emphasis, strange emphasis in some real sense. It's one of the things that makes the text so remarkable on the moral stranger and foreigner. And so when the society is unstable and shaking in a variety of ways, it's often the moral foreigner who comes in with something wise to say. And I think that's definitely true of those biblical narratives, and it's very interesting that they point them out. But I think it's also true practically. It's like, it's not as if any of us, like we want to have faith in our faith, and we need that because it keeps us together individually and it unites us socially. But then if we insist that if I insist that my faith, which is more like my pride in my own belief, is 100% correct, then I've confused myself with my faith. I've confused myself with Christianity, or perhaps you've confused yourself with Islam. And that's a big mistake because...
So let me ask you both a question then, since we can talk about, by the way, one clarification before the question. I've never asked for violence. And that's an accusation I think that needs to be, you need to look back at, because I've never said, let's go and do violence. I said that if such and such group come out again, which were a group of armed people, then we'll be there to defend the community. I've never said in my whole life, and I'll challenge anybody to find anything that's opposite from what I've just said. Now, that's one thing. Second thing I'll say is this, is that, and if it was a violence issue, if I did say that, what's happening with the Metropolitan Police? Why am I not behind bars? Why have there not been a single investigation? It is 210,000 people have watched the video. Unless the police have put their, fingers in their ears, or that they are, if you want to accuse the police of, negligence or incompetence, that's a different story. Let's go to the second point, because you were saying now about this basically dogmatism. Let's just call it for what it is.
Well, it's pride in dogmatism, right? And that's something we all have to watch, because it's a hard line to walk, because you want to be an advocate for your faith, but what in the world do you know, right? You're ignorant beyond comprehension.
Let me ask a question, and both of you, this is a question to both of you. Is there an ultimate purpose of life?
Yeah, sure.
What is it?
What we're doing here.
Which is what?
Hopefully trying to make peace.
Is that enough?
We'll see.
Yeah. Because
it's better than the alternative.
What's the alternative?
Hell.
Okay.
Which we're toying with. I don't mean us. Us too. That's for sure. But things are shaky at the moment on many fronts, and we have this opportunity in front of us, all of us, to have a very abundant world, right, where everyone has enough, and maybe more than enough. And we're shaky about that. We're not sure that that's acceptable, and we're not sure everybody should have it. We're not sure everybody deserves it, and even ourselves. And we're retreating into our corners in some real sense, and we're not addressing the elephants under the carpet. And you can't do that. Like the things we're discussing contentiously now, they make for rough conversations, but they make for a lot rougher streets if you don't talk them out. And you have to do that in a spirit of ignorance. Like I was hoping to come here today and listen, I talk a lot. There's my flaw, but I don't know how to feel the right way forward. I think part of it is, first of all, to find commonalities. We believe in the fundamental necessity of a uniting book, across the Jewish, Christian, and Muslim faiths. That's not nothing. Like, that's a strange thing to insist upon, and yet we all seem to agree. We believe in a higher and purposeful unity, the necessity of that, and then also in the necessity of putting that above all else. And we also agree that we're not very good at that. But that's the hardest one to get, is that even if you do claim in some sense to worship the highest in this monotheistic sense, that doesn't mean you're very good at it. And that's a hard pill to swallow, especially when you're trying to also be a courageous knight of your faith, let's say. It's hard to be properly humble in the face of the divine, but that might be in some sense the proper command. I mean, the fact that Islam means submission is a reflection of that in some sense, right? Just remember who's God here and who isn't. And that's a very hard thing to keep in mind. So when I listen to you, you disagreeable character, I'm trying to separate out the wheat from the chaff, you know? Because there's no doubt I have many things to learn, as I learned to some degree when I put out that
honestly,
message.
I appreciate this part of, like, you know, I learned from your humility, honestly, the way that you come across. And once again, I do appreciate both of you coming here, you know, and I appreciate disagreeability as well. Like, what you've said there is good. I deserve the accountability, just like he does. I don't want to be a person who, you know, can't dish it out, who dishes it out but can't get it himself. I deserve it. What I wanted to say is this to both of you. I want to do a thought experiment, yeah? And so imagine you're going to sleep. I don't know where you guys are staying now, what hotel you're staying. You're watching my videos, you know, me with the masks and stuff like that before you go to sleep. Subscribe on the channel, whatever you do, yeah? And now you're, after you've, you know, put the dislike and done your negative comments, which I deleted already and put it in the trash, which is what you do as well with tweets, and, you know, we can talk about that later. But after that's all happened and you've gone to sleep, you both go to sleep now, right? You wake up and you find yourselves on a ship. On a ship, yeah? And people are eating food, people are drinking, people are this and that, and so things happening. Now, what would be the first questions that you would ask the people around you? Would you ask things like, how did I get here? Where are we going? Are these...
Yeah. Those seem like the first two good... Those are good questions to ask in general. Where are we? Go. How did we get here?
And this is
where are we going?
Beautiful. That's what I wanted to actually get to, because this is what Heidegger, you know, Martin Heidegger, he's a controversial figure in his own right. Okay, but he described this as the thrownness of life. Yeah. Because we're chucked into life. We're thrown into life, right? So the fact now that we're in this world, these questions that we would be asking if we were on a ship and we're just chucked on a ship are the same very questions, like you said, you know, that we would be asking if we're in this world. Where did we come from? Where are we going? I think if we can't get these two questions right, nihilism will persist. You're a nihilistic expert. You've spoken a lot about nihilism. I think if we can't get those two...
He's a counter-nihilistic expert.
I'm not a nihilist. If you want, ask what I think my purpose, the purpose is to be united with God. That would be my
beautiful.
answer.
Yeah, beautiful. Okay, so from the Islamic perspective, it's this, right? First of all, ask these three questions. Where did I come from? Where am I going? And what am I doing here? What is the purpose of life? What is it? And the answer is, we came from a creator, okay? So we can approach this in whatever argument you like. I'm doing the PhD in contingency argument. You can do it anything you want. You can do it, for example, through the fact that the universe is regular and stable and uniform and possesses life. What's the best explanation for that? Is it knowledge or not knowledge? So we would say it's knowledge, right? Or as we say, it's a creative capacity of some sort. We came from this creative capacity. We came from this knowledge force, right? So that's the first thing we say. We came from this force, this higher power. Where are we going? We're going back to the higher power, right? And we're going back to the higher power with our deeds, which we have to be responsible for, which is exactly, it's a hallmark of what you stand for. And that's, I believe genuinely, that's why you're asking why are so many people listening to you. Because we reject original sin, with all due respect. Original sin says that one man, gave us a sin, the other man took it away. Basically, I mean, we're fallen creatures, and then Jesus, you got to believe in sola fide. You believe in whatever you know about Christianity.
I'm Orthodox, so I don't believe that.
Oh, fair enough. Okay, fine.
I don't believe in original sin the way you described it.
Oh, fine,
but that's fine.
But fine, no worries. Eastern Orthodox, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, fine. But the issue is that this...
I didn't say I believed in it either. I just said that the concept of original sin is an expression of this problem that we're describing, which is that we're all burdened with something approximating, the thrownness and this ambivalent relationship we have with the atrocity of history And that's worse, because if you study the atrocity of history with any degree of seriousness, you have to take account of the fact that people like you did it. And you might think, well, I wouldn't do it. It's like, yeah.
No, I get you.
I wouldn't be so sure about that.
For sure. I mean, you know, you were talking about the kind of, you were talking about the suffering. And obviously one of the major sufferings is the Holocaust. I was reading the book, The Meaning for Life, Viktor Frankl, I'm sure you're aware of it, where he then produced logotherapy and all these kind of things. And it goes back to what Nietzsche said. You know, if you have a why, almost any how is possible. You know?
Bearable.
Yeah, if you have a why, almost any how is possible. So it goes back to, everything goes back to purpose. Logotherapy. Yeah, just, if you have a purpose, then everything is possible. That's why I think that you can do the best as a human species, yeah, in the human condition, if your purpose is transcendental. It's higher than the physical, the material. And for us, the purpose is mentioned in chapter 51, verse 19 of the Quran, which is, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. We have not created human beings and jinn except for that they may worship me. What is worship? It's the epitome, the higher point of submission. Is the epitome of love as well.
Hijab just cooked on that one. I'm not gonna lie. If that's what Muslims really believe, they are actually right on that one. And that is the truth. But Christians also believe in that regard. And Jordan Peterson, he may not be the best person to be delving into conversations with other religions as a representative for Christianity as a whole, because he still has some things that he has to wrestle with. He still leans too far on interpreting the Bible into his intellectual concepts to make the Bible understandable to him from a human perspective, which is very dangerous. But I will speak for Christianity in this video and say, we believe that all humanity was created for the sole purpose of worshiping the Creator. The issue is that is subjective to what the individual or organization classifies as worship. Now, there is some nuance to this, because worship obviously isn't just singing a song, lifting your hands, bowing down, or praying. Worship is done through our life, and a life that we live by doing everything to the glory of God. Living your life in such a way that it shows that you have a reverence for God as sovereign and the authoritative figure over your life, and that you have made a choice to honor Him in all of your matters of life. That you're going to do this as a father, as a sibling. You're going to do this as a friend, as a husband, that this is how you're going to conduct yourself in business or in the workplace, that you're going to do it in creativity with all of your heart, with all of your mind and all of your soul, that you're going to worship God.
Jonathan has an interesting take on that too, that has to do with celebration, which I think is psychologically appropriate. Do you want to? I don't want to put you on the spot, but it's something I've been struggling to understand more. I've attended some Orthodox ceremonies with Jonathan and also on my own, and he's very perspicacious when it comes to describing the role of both worship and ritual, and so there's an element. Anyways, I'll let you continue with that.
No, I agree. I agree that worship is also the manner in which we bind together, right? And so without something we celebrate together, then we don't. And so we have different levels of what we celebrate. We can celebrate in our families, the things that bind us, but ultimately that has to reach all the way up into something which is beyond.
I think that's actually very powerful, And in fact, the very first lines of the Quran is Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, which is all praise and thanks belong to God, Lord of the worlds. All praise and all thanks. And this is a kind of celebration. This is a kind of praise. We agree that praising God at the highest level, celebrating God. I mean, the word hallelujah.
Well, I would say in some sense, if we're doing that, well, there was some comments at the beginning about the importance of music. And you opened this event with music, and I've been beginning to open my events with music. And part of the reason that that's very much worthwhile and has to do with this drumbeat that underlies everything is that music is a manifestation of something like the joyful spirit of harmonious play. And it's not semantic, right? It grips you and it sets the tone.
I've heard you say something before about this. You said that music was impervious to refutation.
It's impervious to rational.
And I
The
think
meaning
that was-
of music
yeah,
is
I-
impervious to rational
Yeah, and I think
criticism.
that was a very powerful way
It's
of putting it.
something, man. It's something to know. You know, and so with the musical manner in which the Quran is presented, a major part of that is the music, and the music speaks. We know the music speaks of layers of patterned harmony, and you talked about the individualism of the West, and I think that there's a flaw in that particularized conception that needs to be addressed by something that's more approximating a communitarian ethos. And I think you can understand that relationship to music because, look, to some degree, the three of us can sit on stage and everyone in the audience, we can be comfortable at the moment psychologically. So we're not too anxious and we're kind of engaged because there's a certain degree of playful harmony that we've established.
Especially with him now.
So there's
he's
some
known my dark secrets about,
there's
my
some
violence.
fractiousness, right? But we're able to integrate that, and so that means we can remain calm. And so one of the things that indicates is that part of our ability to remain calm and focused is dependent on social integration. So you have to ask yourself, well, could you be sane if your marriage was insane? Could you be sane if your relationship with your children was too fractious? Could you be sane if you had no friends, if you didn't integrate yourself into the community and maybe the state and then maybe a higher vision? And as far as I can tell, the answer to that is no, you can't be sane by yourself. It's not merely a matter of psychological integration. It's not merely a matter of the isolated individual. And of course, we understand that in the West, although perhaps not as well as we should formally, because we'll punish criminals, for example, by putting them in solitary confinement. And that's another indication of the impossibility of, maybe if you were an expert meditator and a religious man, you could tolerate the solitude, but you probably wouldn't be a criminal then. So my point is that I view this process of integration as a multi-layered process that involves the integration of the community all the way up to the highest place. And that highest place has to be a unity, as Jonathan pointed out, or we're divided. And so we might want to seek amongst us as much as we can for a common unity, at least start with that. And that's what we're trying to do in this conversation.
Yes, but unity is different to uniformity. So I say the difference being is that, in the Islamic discussion or discourse, it's like there's a verse in the Quran, in fact, it says, Lakum dinukum waliya din. You have your religion, we have ours. We can demarcate and still tolerate. That's the point. And I think
appreciate even.
Yeah, even appreciate.
That would be
Absolutely.
good.
We even love each other. It's
no issue
at all.
I don't know if we can manage that.
No, I think we can. I mean, that's the thing. Going back to the message of Muslims, I think this is where, can I ask you a question? Have you ever been to a Muslim country?
Yes.
Which ones have you been to?
I've been to Morocco, and I've been to Turkey, and now have I been to any other Muslim countries? Okay. Not yet.
Okay.
There's many on the itinerary.
Okay. Go to a Muslim country with a Christian population. I'm originally from Egypt. Yeah, we've had Coptic Christians there for years. Yes. Yeah, we've had them for 1,400 years. I mean, they were there before the Muslims came, right? And the point is that if you go to Ghana, go to Nigeria, this bleak image of Muslims and Christians kind of fighting each other, I don't think that's what's really going on. I'm not saying that there's no grievance there when the Christian community is in Muslim majority lands. That would be a lie and that would be false and that can easily be refuted. What I am saying is that it's not as bad as you think. If you go to these countries, you will not find, I do not think you will find what's going on, for example, you're talking about Hindutva, in India with the Muslim minorities and a Hindu, supposedly, majority, which is a peaceful religion. What's going on there? What's going on in China with the Muslim minority there? Or, for example, may I add, sorry to say, but what's happening in Palestine as well. So
I don't want to paint any large-scale endeavor with the brush that's, let's say, dipped in the blood of its worst excesses. I don't think that's helpful because then we're all irredeemable in some real sense. I think it's much wiser for us to see what we can jointly celebrate and see if we can manage that in something like a spirit of ignorance and hope. You know, because one of the things I learned a long time ago, it was very helpful for me as a clinician, was that if everything wasn't perfect around me all the time, it was probably, at least in part, because I was much less than I could conceivably be. And one of the things I learned from Carl Jung, who's a great thinker, was that what you need most will be found where you least want to look. And yes, well, and it's almost by definition, right? Because you can imagine that you're most likely to be most ignorant about what you're most afraid of and most contemptuous of. And so by definition, that's the last place you want to look. And if you're an advocate of a given religious faith, one of the last places you might want to look is in the wisdom of an alternative faith.
I agree.
And so, but you know, that's,
Well, Carl,
who are you to be
Yeah.
such a committed advocate of a faith that's so complex that there's no way that someone like you can understand it? And I mean that of your own faith. And so it's not so obvious that the stranger you think is the devil doesn't have something to say.
I get you, but you know, I once heard you quote Carl Jung, because obviously you mention him a lot in your books, and I learned a lot from you about Carl Jung.
Yeah.
That he stated that, you know, the West are technological giants but moral dwarfs.
In comparison, yes.
Yeah. So,
and that's the problem all over the world increasingly, right?
Yeah,
We're technological giants,
I
but
agree,
moral midgets.
to some extent. But what I was going to say here is that, going back to Carl Jung here, because, for example, and going back to the issue of purpose, yeah? If we're speaking about purpose, I watched your discussion with Sam Harris, and you were speaking about your
The last one?
No, there was one that you done. I don't know what. It wasn't that famous. You weren't speaking to him like this. But there was one point of it which really was like, it gave me an insight into your. I don't want to be a psychologist here, right? But it gave me maybe I dare say it gave me an insight into your psychological state, because Sam Harris, he said to you, he said your conception of pragmatism. That truth is malleable or whatever. There's not one capital T truth like correspondence.
Well, I said more that I don't believe that the most fundamental truth is objective in the scientific sense, and I don't think it can be.
So
not that objective truth isn't useful.
So in that sense, your perspective, and you will know this as well, is more epistemologically pragmatist rather than correspondence theory, right? So correspondence theory says like one truth out there.
I think correspondence theories have to be nested under pragmatic theories in some real sense.
So you're saying the same thing as the American pragmatist said, Charles Peirce and William James.
Okay, yes, very much.
So what I was going to say with that, he said, if you believe in this, it will be at your peril. And you know what you said? You responded, you retorted, you said, it has been at my peril. You said it has. Now, let's focus on this, because this is actually deep. You said it has been at my peril. Why would
everything's at your peril, man.
No? But think about this for a second, because I heard your voice and these words stuck in my mind. Yeah, you said it has been at my peril. Now let me submit something to you today. Could it be that it's at your peril because if you don't believe in truth with a capital T in the correspondence theory sense, that there is a God, and that's a true statement, just like 2 + 2 = 4 is a true statement. Just like the geocentric model, the heliocentric model is a true statement. In that sense, there is a God out there. And he created the world. He created you. He's sustaining the universe. He is maintaining the universe. There is a true statement, and that is in a correspondence theory sense. If you don't have that level of certainty, then you will end up being in existential angst, and you will end up being depressed. Because that's what the Quran says. The Quran states, وَمَنْ أَعْرَضَ عَنْ ذِكْرِي فَإِنَّ لَهُ مَعِيشَةً ضَنْكَ. Whoever swerves away from my remembrance will have a depressed life. So for us,
I think that I think almost by definition, when you veer from a path oriented towards the highest unity, that you fall apart. It's by definition. Now, I don't know what that means specifically with regards to a correspondence theory, because the correspondence theorists tend to be more oriented towards a materialist viewpoint, and that doesn't seem to me to work out very well when discussing something like God. Do I think that we strive towards a higher unity, that unity is real and that it's necessary?
No, but there's no contradiction in having correspondence theory in dualism or idealism. It doesn't have to be materialism, because that would indicate the truthhood of empiricism.
Well, I would say then my answer to that is that I try to act as if that's true. And I think I say I act as if it's true because I'm not in a position to make any final judgments in some real sense, but I am in a position to stake my life on certain faith-based propositions. That's what you can do. That doesn't mean you're right, but that's what you have at your disposal. And so I am trying to do that, to feel the proper way forward in this spirit of, let's say, playful unity,
Yes.
and to put that above all else, which is partly why I also said that I did it at my peril.
The thing is, what I would say is that if you take the proposition that truth is utility, yeah, and what is useful is that which is true, that's basically the American pragmatist stance. If you take that,
Well, it's not exactly, not exactly. Well, there, see, I think
that's what Charles Peirce said almost by word.
I know.
Yeah.
The pragmatists are more like engineers, which is, well, you can't build a perfect bridge, because what do you know? You can't build anything perfect, but you can build a bridge that's a bridge insofar as it will stand up and allow you to walk across it for 400 years. And so, and then the notion there is, well, it's not perfect. It doesn't correspond precisely to the ultimate nature of reality, let's say, but it's good enough to move you from point A to point B. And so...
Yes, but going back to Viktor Frankl and the idea of meaning, what I'm saying is, I know you're a psychoanalyst, this, from the Quranic paradigm, this will not be enough. Meaning, based on your current paradigm, according to the Islamic diagnosis, you will be depressed. Why? Because your purpose is not strong enough. Do you see the point?
Yes, well, that's probably true.
So, I know that sounds a bit intrusive, so I do apologize for that. But I want
I don't think it is intrusive, because I think if you deviate from that orientation towards unity, then I know this from a psychological perspective. If you deviate from orientation toward the highest unity, which you might think about as the highest goal, two things happen. One is you experience less positive emotion, so joy and enthusiasm and engagement, because positive emotion is experienced in relation to a goal, not as a consequence of achieving it. So if you're pursuing the highest goal, then you're celebrating most intently. And then if the goal you're pursuing isn't unified, then it's multiplicitous, and then you're confused and anxious and unstable and depressed. So I would say that's true by definition.
What I was reading recently, I've read all your books, and I even read some of your peer-reviewed work. Because when I was going to speak to you, then I said, you know what, I'm going to do my homework. So I read everything. One of the things that you said one time in The Maps of Meaning, you started off the book by saying, when you were a young lad, I don't know how young you were, you said that you found the doctrines of Christianity incomprehensible and absurd, And you also said that you found you had some kind of issue with Christianity because of the Genesis narrative and how incongruent it was with scientific narratives. You went to a pastor, you said, or a church cleric or something, and then you left the church. Now, I've got a question. Do you still have the same position, or have you changed your position?
Well, I've changed my position a lot. I was only 13 then, and I was caught up in the battle, insofar it was manifested in me when I was 13. I was caught in the battle between Enlightenment rationality and traditional narrative belief. I had no idea how to reconcile those two things.
Do you feel like you can do that now?
I'm doing my best to reconcile.
So let me be more
and I think, well, I certainly can do it a lot more than I did when I was 13.
Let me give you an example, right? This point, when you were 13, I think you were thinking straight. I'm sorry to be very straight.
It's hard to believe that someone is disagreeable with you as you would manage that.
Because someone with an IQ of 180 or whatever you have, someone of your intelligence. When you were 13, you probably had an IQ of, 120 or something, So you were operating like my friend over here, Ali Dawa, on his level, at the age of 13. But what I was going to say was that, the reason why I think he was, because look at the Trinity, for example. Look at the schisms. Now, this goes to your specialism. The idea of three all-powerful entities, that Jesus is all-powerful, that the Father is all-powerful, the Son is all-powerful, and the Holy Spirit is all-powerful, but there's not three all-powerfuls, there's one all-powerful. You have one ultimately willing being, which is a person, which is Jesus, and another person, which is ultimately willing, which is the Son. The Quran states about this, it says, مَا اتَّخَذَ اللَّهُ مِنْ وَلَدٍ وَمَا كَانَ مَعَهُ مِنْ إِلَهٍ إِذًا لَذَهَبَ كُلُّ إِلَهٍ بِمَا خَلَقَ وَلَعَلَ بَعْضُهُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ. In chapter 23, verse number 91, it says that Allah has not taken any son, and he did not have any creator with him. Had that been the case, they would have stripped one another for what they would have competed and tried to outstrip one another for power. Meaning this idea of three all-powerful persons is unintelligible to say the least. The idea that Jesus Christ exhibits two natures, I know that there are schisms and there's differences of opinion among Christians, but the fact that you have this human nature where Jesus is walking and he sees the tree and he can't eat from the tree, he doesn't know that the tree is in season or not, or that he doesn't know when the hour is, or whatever it may be. The Quran says it very clearly. كَانَا يَأْكُلَانِ طَعَامٍ. Him and his mum used to eat food. This proposition that they're limited and unlimited at the same time is it's a contradiction. It's an affront to logic. This will cause you cognitive dissonance. Because if you want to be a rational actor and you want to
See, that's the thing.
Yeah.
I don't want to be a rational actor.
But you do when you do your scientific experiments.
That's true.
So why'd you separate the two things?
Because rationality should be subordinated to something above it. And I'm trying to subordinate myself to that. And so my reaction to what you're saying is that this isn't an insult.
Yeah,
I'm telling you what my reaction is.
Please say
it's not even a criticism.
Of course.
I find that discussion, as soon as it started, I found that less interesting than what we were doing before. It was harder for me to focus on. And I think the reason for that is that it transforms to some, and I'm not saying this isn't necessary at sometimes, but it transforms the transcendent into something like an intellectual and propositional discussion. And so in some sense, we're debating perhaps not the fine points of theology, because they're more like the blunt points of theology.
I understand.
But there's something about that that isn't what I want to do with you.
Yes.
You know, and it isn't that it's not necessary. So let me flip it around to some degree. So one of the things I'm very curious about is, obviously, the figure of Christ is contentious.
Yes.
And so the Jews don't know what to make of Christ in some fundamental sense, because he seems like a continuation of the prophetic tradition in some real sense, plus he was Jewish, so that makes things complicated. And then, of course, the Christians put the figure of Christ as central in some real sense, but that begs the question of the relationship between Christ and God. And then in the Muslim community, Christ is also a central figure. And so I'm curious about that, and we could say we have doctrinal differences about what constitutes that centrality. It's like, fair enough, and I would also not say that I understand what that centrality means. So one of the ways I would understand that, let's say, is that in the Western tradition, and I don't know to what degree this is true in the Muslim tradition, one of the attributes of what Christ is psychologically is the logos. And so if we're engaged in dialogue, which is dual logos, then we're embodying the spirit of something like mutual enlightenment. And that's then the presence of that spirit in the genuine confines of temporal reality, right? It's something like the infinite descending to the finite to illuminate us. And to the degree that we can have a dialogue in good faith, which is also a religious notion, then we can engage in that process of dialogos, and that transforms and redeems us. And then when I say, well, do I believe that? I say, well, it isn't just that I believe it as a proposition. It's that I can tell when it's happening. And so can you, I think. It's like, you're going to see that this conversation will ebb and flow, you know, and some of the time it's going to grip you. You think, we're at the heart of the matter, and sometimes your attention's going to wander. And your attention's going to wander when we're off the path. And so I would say that to the degree that you and I are communicating, this is a religious way of thinking about it, is that we're doing our best to embody the spirit of the Logos. And if that's working, then we're making progress. And I know that in the Western tradition, that's part of what has been conceptualized as the fundamental attribute of the figure of Christ. And I know that Christ is central in the Muslim tradition. And so one of the things I would want to know is not how we differ doctrinally, because I don't even think I'm qualified to debate you on that case.
We've got the guy here.
Well, Jonathan might have some things to say, but what I would like to know instead is, why do you believe that the figure of Christ is central in some sense, or maybe I've got that wrong, although I don't think so. Why do you think the figure of Christ is central both to the Muslim faith and the Christian faith? And what do you think that says about what we share in common? Because I really don't understand that. It's a mystery to me.
Okay, so Jesus Christ, secular historians will look at him and differ on his existence or not. The majority, to be fair, do believe he existed, right? Even secular historians, atheists and agnostics and whatever it may be, right?
It's the simplest explanation.
Yeah, it's a simple, of course, yeah. So I believe that, first of all, Jesus Christ existed, which in the modern age is worth noting, right? Muslims Muslims are the only other major world religion who believe in Jesus Christ as the Messiah, as the prophet.
Right,
He had the virgin
and
birth.
this is a strange thing,
Yeah,
so we
yeah,
should definitely be
yeah.
trying to sort that out.
All right, so this is the first point of commonality. We believe in Jesus Christ. We believe in his miracles, that he cured the blind with God's permission, that he raised the dead with God's permission. We believe that he even, he created some things which in the Gospel of Thomas not mentioned in the Bible, like, but for example, the clay bird and so on, that he blew into it and it became an actual bird, that he cured the leper with God's permission. We believe that he was one of the mightiest human beings that have ever lived on the earth. And we believe that his mother was the best woman who ever lived on the earth.
Now we're getting into the good stuff. The deity of God, and the roles have reversed. Now Hijab is trying to understand God from an intellectual standpoint, just like Dr. Peterson was, which again is extremely dangerous and impossible. We will never on this side of eternity be able to fully understand God and all of his creation, all that consists of God and who he is, because it hasn't yet been revealed to us, until the Bible says that when we see God, that we're going to be like him, we're going to become like him. Then and only then will we be able to grasp the entirety of God. That's why we get the prophetic visual in Revelations that when we stand before God, you know what we're going to do? We are going to fall to our faces and begin to worship God like never before, because now we will see God in his fullness. That's why it's important not to try to fit God in some limited human understanding. I appreciate Jordan Peterson because he says that he doesn't want to be a rational actor and that he's not trying to approach this as a scientific experiment, but rather subject himself to a higher authority. He kept it 100. He said, bro, you're losing my interest on this one, because the conversation you're trying to have, what you're doing by trying to have this conversation, he said, it transforms the transcendent into an intellectual, improvisational discussion. Sheesh. It's remarkable how people are not willing to accept the truth, even when it's very evident to be able to see. I say that because there are some heavy hitter scriptures out there that point to the deity of Christ, starting with Isaiah chapter 7, verses 14. It says this, it says, therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. This is prophetic scripture. The one who will be born of a virgin will be called Emmanuel, which means God with us, not prophet with us, but God with us. And guess what? That prophecy was fulfilled. Here's another scripture, Colossians 1:15-19. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things were created through him and for him, and he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in everything he might be preeminent. For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell. Listen to that scripture. It's heating up. But I see how some would still try to refute it. So guess what? I got another scripture. Listen to this. Philippians chapter 2, verses 5 through 8. Let this mind be in you, which also is in Christ Jesus, who being in the form of God, did not consider it robbery to be equal with God, but made himself of no reputation, taking the form of a bondservant and coming in the likeness of men, and being found in the appearance as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even the death of the cross. Sheesh. Jesus didn't consider it robbery to be equal with God. Still, I feel like there's still some people out there that still might try to argue. Now it's time to drop the mic. Hebrews chapter 1, verses 1 through 3 and verses 8 through 10. God, who at various times and in various ways spoke in the times past to the fathers by the prophets, has in these last days spoken to us by his Son, whom he has appointed heir of all things, through whom also he made the worlds, who being the brightness of his glory and the express image of his person, and uphold all things by the word of his power, and when he had by himself purged our sins, sat down at the right hand of the majesty on high. But to the Son, he says, catch this right now, your throne, O God, is forever and ever. A scepter of righteousness is the scepter of your kingdom. You have loved righteousness and hated lawlessness. And here we go again. Therefore, God, your God, has anointed you with the oil of gladness more than your companions, and you, Lord, not lowercase l, uppercase L, Lord, in the beginning laid the foundation of the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. Now, do I understand all of this from a human perspective? No, I don't understand all of this from a human perspective, but that doesn't matter because the major point is clear to me. Jesus is God. And just because I don't completely understand it, it doesn't mean that it's not true. The issue with Muslims is they have completely disregarded the New Testament as scripture, which to me, that doesn't even make sense for several different reasons. Number one is that they are not Jewish. They are Gentiles, just like I am a Gentile, just like everybody else that isn't Jewish is a Gentile. So essentially, everything that they would know about Yahweh, the God of the Israelites, would be by word of mouth from the Israelites or from them reading scriptures. Now, I know that the Jewish people also don't believe in the New Testament or in Jesus as the Messiah. So that's a similarity that they share together. But what's incongruent about this is if God chose to reveal himself to all of humanity through his chosen people, the Jews, why then would he begin to reveal himself through a completely different nation of people through this book, the Quran, that came through the so-called Prophet Muhammad? Because this would be insinuating that Yahweh was no longer the God of the Jews. And in order for that to be the case, God would have to forsake his everlasting covenant that he made with the Jewish people to replace them with the Arabic people. That idea right there is in direct contradiction with the Old Testament that Muslims claim that they believe in. Because God's covenant will forever remain with the Jewish people, because once God has spoken something, he can't go back on it. His word is true. And this is going to be a covenant with them, regardless if the Jewish people reject him or not. So this false ideology is the reason why right now there is extreme contention between the Jewish and Arabic nations. This is the reason why right now they are fighting for the very promised land that God gave the Jewish people. They're fighting for it right now. Truthfully, the Quran, in one sense, is equivalent to the New Testament in the fact that they would both be considered as God's final revelation to man. The difference is that the New Testament is not a revelation given by man, some prophet who all of a sudden comes on the scene, but the New Testament was given by Jesus Christ, who was in humanly form Jewish, but he was also God in the flesh, who was prophesied about in the Old Testament to come and give the Jewish people a better covenant with God. Just let that sink in. Now, another problem with this is the New Testament was completed 600 years before the Quran was. Logically, it makes no sense not to believe that if the New Testament and the Quran are competing texts against one another, not to believe in the New Testament as it is in perfect agreement and a fulfillment of the Old Testament. When in many ways the Quran, even though Muslims say they believe in the Old Testament, the Quran in many ways is in conflict with the Old Testament. You know, the reality is there's no difference between Muhammad and Joseph Smith or Charles Taze Russell, or even some extreme cult leader that says they have a new revelation of God like Jim Jones or David Koresh. Ultimately, the Christian faith, historically and biblically, makes more sense to put faith in. With that, I encourage you, study this out for yourself and make a rational conclusion to come in agreement with the mind of God. Thank you for watching this video. I appreciate you greatly. I know that your time is valuable, and my hope is that this video added some type of value to your life. And if it did, help us to grow. Help us to add value to even more people's lives by choosing to like this video and partnering with us by becoming a subscriber, and also sharing this video with somebody else that you think it can help. I would also love to hear your opinion of this video in the comment section. And if you have a little bit more time on your hands, I recommend you watch this next video that YouTube is recommending for you to watch. I believe that it will also add some value to your life. And until the next time, remember, we all have a mind, but there's no better mind than the mind of God.